Chapter 5, Seeing the Moonless and Thinking of Wishes. To the south of Weiqing City, there was a small ditch that wasn't even a small stream. Beside the ditch, there was a small slope that wasn't even a small hill, and at the bottom of the slope, there was a grass hut with a fence and a stone apron that wasn't even a small courtyard. At night, when the rain clouds had cleared, the extraordinarily bright starlight sprinkled across the ditch, the dirt slope, and the grass hut, and suddenly gilded them with a layer of very beautiful silver corona. Ning shuffled slowly under the starlight, looking at the grass hut in front of him, where he and Sang Sang had lived for a long time, and couldn't help but slow down a bit. But as long as he was walking, then no matter how slow he was, there would always be a day when he arrived at his destination. He pushed aside the fence wall that could only guard against dogs but not people, walked to the oil light that leaked out from the doorway, raised his hand to block his lips, coughed twice, and said, "How about if we go to the capital city?" The door to the grass hut was pushed open, a creaking shrill piercing the quiet border town night. Little maid Sang Sang squatted down in the doorway, her skinny silhouette drawn extremely long by the oil lamplight, and she pressed her fingers against the edge of the wooden door as she replied, "Haven't you always wanted to go to Chang'an? By the way, Ning, when are you going to go steal some oil from the firearms battalion and come back? This door has been rattling for months now, and the sound is just awful. Who else uses those hard-to-play-with cannons these days? If it's just for oil, I'll go to the supply camp tomorrow and ask." Ning subconsciously responded casually, then suddenly thought of something. "Hey, what I'm about to say to you doesn't seem to be the case. If I really want to leave, what do I care about this broken door for?" Sang Sang stood up with her knees in her hands, her skinny body looking particularly thin in the slightly cool spring night air. She looked at Ning and whispered in a voice that was serious and not mixed with any of the rest of her emotions, "Even if we leave, there will still be people living in this house, and they will still open the door. After the two of them left, would anyone really still be willing to come and live in this remote and dilapidated grass house far from the marketplace?" Ning thought silently. For some reason suddenly more emotions called reluctance came out. He sighed softly, sidestepped and squeezed past Sang Sang, and said in a low voice, "Pack your bags for the night." Sang Sang casually tucked the slightly yellowed hair at her temples together, looking at his back and asking, "Ning, I've never understood why you're so interested in that matter. No one can resist the temptation to make themselves stronger. And those contraptions are just too interesting to me." Knowing that the little maid had guessed his thoughts, Ning looked up at Sang Sang's tanned little face and said with a raised eyebrow, "And the two of us can't stay in Weiqing for the rest of our lives. The world's so big, and there's a lot of countries other than the Empire that we have to visit, and even if it's on a smaller scale, just to earn more money and get promoted a bit faster, going to Chang'an is still too much better than staying in Weiqing. So this time I must enter the academy." A thoughtful emotion passed over Sang Sang's face. Because of her age, the little maid's eyebrows and eyes did not have long hair, and because of the relationship between the wind and sand of the border city, her little face was dark and rough, coupled with the head of yellowish hair caused by childhood malnutrition. She really could not talk about good-looking, not even a clear beauty. But she has a pair of eyes like willow leaves, long and thin, eyes like ice like bright, plus rarely have any too obvious color, so it's not like a miserable origin will be 11 or 12 years old little maid, but like a know-everything. See through the world of the heart is not hindered by the mature woman, this real age appearance and the eyes of the extreme contrast between the eyes, so that she looks extra cold and stylish. Ning knew that these were all illusions. In his opinion, the little maid Sang Sang was a typical girl who lacked a heart. The two of them had been living together for so many years, and because she had gotten used to relying on her own thinking to do things, she had gotten lazier and lazier. Because she had gotten lazier and lazier, she had become more and more stupid, and in order to cover up the clumsiness she had used fewer and fewer words in every sentence she had spoken, and so she appeared to be more and more silent and cold, and mature and weird. It's not stupidity, it should be clumsiness. He thought about certain things and silently corrected himself in his mind. After a long time of silence, Sang Sang suddenly raised his head, bit his lips, revealed a rare wince, and said, "I heard that Chang'an is very big, and there are a lot of people." The capital city is prosperous. I heard that the population had already exceeded 1 million by the third year of the Tianqi, and that the cost of living is extremely expensive. Chang'an residents, big and not easy ah. Ning sighed, saw the little maid's nervous expression, smiled and comforted. There's nothing to be afraid of if there are many people. Just think of Chang'an as a bigger Weiqing. When the time comes, it's still me who'll be dealing with the outsiders. And you'll be running the household as usual, so if you really want to be afraid, you'll just go out less often. How much does it cost to buy meat, vegetables, rice, and grain in the capital city in a month? Sang Sang's willow leaf-like eyes stared extremely round. Two small hands tightly clutched the hem of the cloth skirt, nervously asked, "Will it be more than 4 taels of silver?" That would be double than Weiqing. If I do get into the academy, you'll always have to pull some good fabric for me to make some clothes. Plus there might be guests at the house, like fellow students or something, and in case any of the misters take a liking to your young master me, they might also come to the house to do some work, so you'll have to make at least a new set of clothes, and I've done some rough calculations to figure out how it would have to be 10 taels of silver. Ning furrowed his brows and replied, in reality he was just talking blindly with extreme seriousness. He wasn't very aware that 10 taels of silver for the scholars in the academy could possibly just be the price of a casual table at a large restaurant in the heavenly fragrant square, just like that famous joke from the Hushi Road. The peasant woman working in the fields idly chattering, always thinking of the Eastern Palace maiden cooking meat pie, the queen of the West Palace in peeling onions, meat pie like a sea, onions like a mountain. However, even this obviously shrunken long answer is far beyond the psychological bottom line of the little maid. She frowned and looked at him seriously and suggested, "It's too expensive. Ning Jiao, let us not go to Chang'an, and you don't want to take the examination for the academy, okay?" Insightless thing. Ning reprimanded, "After entering the academy, you can definitely become an official. When you and I spend 10 taels of silver a month, how can I not earn 70 to 80 taels of silver a month at the yamen? Besides, what's wrong with Chang'an? Chinjinji's rouge and powder don't too much owe." Rouge and powder, 4 words, actually seems to be the key point of the little maid. She tightly pursed lips, obviously into a very intense psychological struggle. After a long time she replied with a mosquito voice, "But what about the years that you read the school? My women's read is average. Chang'an people's eyes must be high. I don't see how I can sell it. This is indeed troublesome. I heard that you can't hunt around Chang'an city. Those mountains and forests are all owned by the emperor's lord. How much money do we have left?" The master and servant looked at each other, and then extremely tacitly walked to the 2 large elm boxes, opened the box from the deepest part of the inside, and touched out an extremely tightly wrapped wooden box. The wooden box is all scattered silver, like the size of a nail. On the silver corner obviously have hinged scratches, in the middle of only a large silver ingot. At a glance know that is the weekday savings, just the number is not too much. Looking at the loose silver in the wooden box, both people did not count. Sang Sang whispered, "The old rule of 5 days to count once. The night before yesterday just counted 76 taels and 3 coins and 4 cents. It seems like we must think of ways to earn more money after we go to Chang'an." Ning said with a serious expression. "Well, I'll strive to raise my level of women's honoring a bit more." Sang Sang replied with a serious expression. At night, Sang Sang knelt on the kong to organize the bedding. Her dry and thin knees moved quickly, her movements were nimble and fast, and when she pressed down with her small palms, she pressed out an arc in the middle of the pillow, the very arc that Ning slept most comfortably on. Then she picked up her own bedding and jumped out of the cold bed, walking to the corner of the room by the 2 large elm crates to start making her own bed. When the lights went out, Ning set the water bowl down on the windowsill, and by the light of the stars, he burrowed under the quilt, put his hands on the edge of the quilt, and let out a huge yawn before letting out an extremely contented sigh, closing his eyes. And only after a while did he hear that rustling sound from the corner of the house that he had heard for years. This was a night that seemed as if it was no different from these past years, and they would fall into a deep sleep with the starlight of the empire's borders. However, the real situation was that today, both the master and servant in the straw house did not fall asleep. either because of the excitement of being about to set foot in a brand new world, or because of the prosperity of the capital city Chang'an, the wealth and riches that could be seen in the faintest of sights, as well as those perfumed cosmetics that gave off a fascinating scent, and the two voices in the corners of the house by the window were not able to calm down. Breathing sounds were slow to calm down. I don't know how long it took, but Ning opened his eyes, looked at the faint silver halo on the window paper, and said out of breath, "I've heard that the girls in Chang'an City aren't very afraid of the cold, and that they wear very thin clothes, with big necklines, and that their bodies are very white, and I don't know if it's true or not." Was too young then to remember. He rolled over, looked into the dark and fuzzy corner of the house, and asked, "Sang, have you been sick lately? Will it be cold?" The little maid in the darkness seemed to be shaking her head, and vaguely could be seen clutching the corner of the quilt tightly, her eyes closed tightly, but the corner of her lips were hanging on to an extremely rare smile as she replied in a low murmur, "I've heard that all the girls in Chang'an City are indeed quite white, and they use such a good watery powder every day, so can they not be white?" Ning smiled, looked at her, and said, "Don't worry, when this young master has money in the future, Jinji's rouge and water powder will be at your disposal." Sang opened her eyes with a start, bright starlight reflecting in her willow-like slender eyes, and said solemnly, "Ning, this is what you promised. As I said earlier, after you go to Chang'an you must remember to always refer to me as young master, so as to appear respectful." It had been 7 or 8 years since Ning had tumbled the cold-bodied little Sang out of the pile of dead people by the roadside and then rolled over to Weiqing. Although Sang was a servant girl in the household registry and did what servant girls did, she had never called him young master, which didn't mean anything else but a habit. Today young servant girl Sang was forced to throw off that habit. "Ning, young master, you have to remember to promise to buy me Jinji." Ning answered, his gaze falling on the starlight that looked like white frost on the ground by the side of the Kong, his heart tightening slightly for no apparent reason, that empty feeling from many years ago striking him once again. He turned back to look out of the window at the deep green night sky, glancing at the star-filled sky before beginning to lower his head in thought of his hometown, muttering, "There's still no moon today." Sang on the elm cabinet in the corner of the darkened room, curled up in the slightly cool bedding like a little mouse. She reached behind her waist and tugged it, blocking the slightly cool breath outside, and by the way, making the scene between the two cabinets seem less chalky, listening to the ravings coming from the window, thinking Ning, young master has started to say this nonsense again.